Atenção para o toque de 6 conceitos essenciais de análise de negócios. Esse conhecimento está disponível no Guia Baboc para o corpo de conhecimento da análise de negócios. Para saber sobre isso e muito mais, participe do Papo de Negócios ao vivo todas as quartas, às 8 da noite, ou gravado no canal IIBA Brasil no YouTube. Olá, você que nos acompanha em mais um Papo de Negócios aqui no YouTube, no canal IIBA Brasil, ou então no LinkedIn. É um prazer ter você conosco. Se você ainda não se inscreveu no canal do IIBA Brasil, inscreva-se agora. Clica aí no sininho, seja avisado sempre que a gente tiver um novo vídeo aqui para compartilhar com você. Mas, em geral, a gente está aqui todas as quartas-feiras, às 8 horas da noite, sempre com um convidado diferente, falando de algum tema relacionado à análise de negócio. O professor Abílio Passo não pode estar aqui comigo hoje, mas a Daniela Massucchi está aqui para me acompanhar, fazer essa abertura comigo. Boa noite, Dani.
Boa noite, Fabrício. Como é que você está?
Tudo jóia, graças a Deus. É um prazer ter você com a gente aqui, viu?
Obrigada. O prazer é meu.
Dani, sobre o que a gente vai falar hoje?
Bom, hoje a gente vai falar sobre Essential Requirements Practices.
E assim em inglês mesmo?
Hoje o nosso papo vai ser em inglês, né? Então, a gente já vai começar daqui a pouquinho fazer essa mudança aí, e aí eu acho que é uma grande oportunidade, né? Não só para a gente aprender mais sobre requisitos, mas também pegar um pouquinho mais do inglês, né?
Exato. Ou seja, depois da vinheta, tudo em inglês. E aí vem a nossa convidada, e é em inglês hoje, porque temos uma convidada que é autora de um grande livro. Aliás, um grande não, porque ele é curtinho, ele é gostosinho de ler, ele foi feito para ser rapidinho. Software Requirements Essentials, com o Carl Wiggers e a Candace... É difícil falar o nome dela. Candace Hawkinson. Right. Candace Hawkinson. E a Candace veio para conversar com a gente hoje. E ela só fala inglês, então nós vamos falar inglês. Depois da vinheta, tudo em inglês, então, Dani?
Exatamente. Então vamos lá, pessoal.
Vamos lá. So, as promised, now forward, we're just going to be talking in English, and
exactly.
All our guests, our folks that are part of our group, are also going to speak in English. And so, before bringing Candace to join us, I will bring all other persons that are part of our community, starting with João Azevedo. Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello, Fabrício, Dani. Welcome. Thank you very much for the invite, and I'm excited for today's talk.
Yes, and thank you for inviting Candace, because João works with her, and that's where the invitation came from.
That's correct. I just connected the dots in this case.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Another guest that's with us today is Ricardo Peters, and now we can say Peters. Good evening, Ricardo.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. So good to be here again. I'm honored.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. And directly from Portugal, we also have Nuno. Hello, Nuno. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. So excited to be here again.
Thank you for coming as a member of our group today. And we are going to receive, for this meeting, our special guest is Mrs. Candace Hawkinson, talking about essential requirement practices. For those who does not know Candace, let me take this out of my face. She's a senior product manager, business architect, product owner, speaker, trainer, agile coach, and business analyst. She's a PMI Agile certified practitioner. She has more than 10 years of experience in product ownership and business analysis. She has already trained or coached several hundreds of product owners and business analysts. She's a passionate in understanding how to optimize agile in large enterprise, and she's co-author of these books, Essential Requirements Practices with Core Riggers. And I would like to ask to join us. Welcome, Candace. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me. And of course, I noticed that we put the name of the presentation instead of the name of the book. That was my bad. On the last slide.
Don't worry. It's a pleasure to have you here. Candace, we have a script here in our business chat every week. And so before having our guests to present their his or her ideas, we start with some comedy. And so we have what we call the weekly meme. And the weekly meme for this week, we have usually 2 or 3 interesting pictures that we found online. And sometimes we try to relate it to our theme. So this is a client requirement. Why don't you a client saying, why don't you clearly understand my requirements? And what's his requirement? Or something like that. You guys have probably seen something similar to that?
No, never seen those kind of things.
Maybe not that large.
But
Yeah.
we have
Little
perfect
bit.
requirements.
Let's take another one. So this one actually is my one. And I participated in a contest at the BA Live conference. It's a conference for Edinburgh. And they had the picture and they asked it for a text. And I did this one. We have an urgent delivery. Start building immediately. We'll find out the requirements later.
For sure.
Yeah.
Pretty common.
Yeah.
I thought it just happens in Brazil, but, right? And I found this one as well. So let's give the requirements after they release the software. And it's,
They're all good.
If this is peculiar from Brazil, I hope nobody sees that in US. You'll never have that kind of problem, right? So these are the first part of our show, the meme of the week, and the second part is the theme of the day in 1 minute. And that's for you, Danny. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, it happens a lot. Like those reports just arrived like 2 minutes ago, but that's okay. We can do it.
All right. That's with you.
Okay, so let's talk about requirements. The mapping and analysis of requirements are an essential part of business analysis. The Babel guide defines a requirement as a valuable representation of a need, and it represents a series of requirement definitions in different contexts, such as business, stakeholder, functional, and non-functional. Mapping and analyzing requirements involves identifying, documenting, and validating stakeholders' needs, ensuring that the product or service meet business objectives and stakeholders' expectations. When done well, this process helps avoid misunderstandings and rework and enhance team communication. Several practices can assist projects and product teams in understanding the business problem, involving the right participants, articulating effective solutions, communicating information among stakeholders, implementing the proper functionality in the correct sequence, and adapt to change. Here we are.
There you are. Requirements in 1 minute. And
Perfect.
we have with us, beyond the people that are here in this group, there are some people join us online. So Fabiano Bonvino is saying boa noite for everyone. Our friend Guilherme Alves as well. Good night, boa noite. Lina is saying in English, good evening. And Haas from Goiânia is saying salve, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So thank you. It's a pleasure to have you guys here. If you have any question, please just put on the chat and we will bring those questions to Candace. Candace, I will give you the spotlight right now. And if you want to share something to start or some ideas, it's on you. What do you say for us?
Sounds good. I've got a couple of slides here. So what I'll do is I'll go through quickly just the high-level overview of the book, and then the 20 practices in the book. Let's see. And then from there, let me just make sure I've got the right screen picked out.
Yes, your screen should be appearing in a second.
Thinking.
Yep, that's here.
Okay, good, perfect. So we'll go through this, and then after I go through, it's like 5 or 6 slides, then we can just have a discussion. So, so as you heard, I'm Candace Hokinson. So I've been interested in how business analysts, POs, and PDMs can become better at their jobs, especially with regards to requirements, and especially in the agile world. So I love working in the agile methodology. Way back when, I wrote several articles about useful analysis practices in agile, and love giving presentations on these topics as well. There are also, as you know, with the Babok and other large books, there are many large kind of referential books for business analysts, including the one Carl wrote, Software Requirements 3rd edition, with my colleague, Joy Beatty. That one was nearly 650 pages long. But many busy business analysts, product owners, requirements engineers, or product managers, they just don't have time to read a whole big book like that. So Carl realized last year that he could distill down basically the essence of requirements practices into 20 core practices that every project team ought to perform. So last year, I guess it's almost a year to the day, it's about end of July, he invited me along on the journey, and we wrote Software Requirements Essentials. So these 20 practices that we're going to talk about, they apply regardless of the kind of solution you're building or the development lifecycle you're following. So we're going to talk about those 20 core practices at a very high level, and then we'll just have a conversation. We can dig into any ones that you'd like. We do have a website for the book, softwarerex.com. There's many reviews. There's lots of downloads there, a lot of checklists and templates that we put on that website for free references for anyone to access. Okay, so it says agenda, but obviously we're only going to do a couple slides. But we take our 20 practices and we've grouped them into 6 categories. First, we have 5 practices that lay a solid foundation for any project to be successful. Then we have 4 core practices on requirement solicitation, followed by 4 more on requirements analysis, another 4 on requirement specification, 1 on validating requirements, and finally 2 critical requirements management practices. Of course, these 20 practices are by no means the only techniques that you should have in your toolkit. Those big books I mentioned, they could describe dozens and even hundreds of additional practices, and they're all very valuable in specific situations. But Carl and I believe that these 4 are the most important and most universally applicable. One caveat here, when we talk about requirements, we're not necessarily talking about like a specific functional requirement. We're referring to any kind of object that your project uses to represent information about stakeholder needs and the capabilities or characteristics of a solution. These kinds of knowledge encompass business requirements, user requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, use cases, user stories, features, epics, or really whatever you use on your project. And as I give the very high level, some of these may seem like common sense, and in some ways they are. But even while we were writing the book over this past year, I thought back on some of my historical projects where we didn't do all these 20 practices and some of the troubles we ran into. Okay, so when we're laying the foundation for success, every project has requirements, whether they're stated or not, whether that's what they call them or not, whether they call them requirements or user stories, whether they're carefully considered or not, and, well, whether they're documented. They could just be hidden in someone's head. If you have a good set of requirements, they let you answer some important and universal questions. Questions like, why are we working on this? What are we trying to build? Who are we trying to satisfy? What do we implement first? Next? Maybe never? How can we tell if our solution is good enough? And obviously, how do we know when we're done? It's hard for me or Carl to think of a project team or group of stakeholders that wouldn't find the answers to these questions useful. There's several actions you can take early on in a project to get information that lets you answer these kind of questions. That kind of understanding helps the team lay the foundation for a successful project. It ensures that they address the right problem, it aligns everyone towards common objectives, and it makes sure that they engage the right participants and it focuses the team's effort. So here we're going to talk about those 5 core foundational practices. First is to understand the problem before converging on a solution. That before part is very key. So have you ever been on a project that appeared to go through all the right motions, develop the requirements, build the software, deliver the solution, only to discover that they were solving the wrong problem? Many organizations launch initiatives to solve a business problem or exploit a business opportunity. However, a lot of times those problems or opportunities are often neither explicitly stated nor documented. It's a good idea to avoid that presuming either a presented problem or a presented solution is necessarily correct. We want to do some root cause analysis to make sure that the problem is well understood and that a proposed solution makes sense, preferably before you commit to that solution. The second one is defining business objectives. All stakeholders need to understand why an initiative is being launched and what its business objectives are. The third practice is defining the solution's boundaries. Anytime you start a new initiative, you might not know exactly where to draw the line between what the solution should and should not include. An important foundational practice is to establish that what's in, what's out boundary. Number 4 is to identify and characterize your stakeholders. Every project has people who care about it. Stakeholders are individuals or groups that are actively involved in a project, are affected by it, or can influence its direction. You need to cast a large net to identify as many potential stakeholders as possible. Then you can determine who can best represent the needs of each stakeholder group and figure out how the project team will engage with them. And lastly, in laying the foundation, identifying empowered decision makers. Every project faces many requirements-related decisions. These include resolving conflicts both within and across your user classes, prioritizing requirements, evaluating proposed requirements changes, and many more. It's important to determine who those decision makers will be for these requirements issues before that group confronts their first decision. And each group will have to decide on their decision rule that they can apply. As we look to requirements elicitation, that's the second grouping. Here we go. As we look into the requirements elicitation, the first step when getting requirements is, well, obviously to get some. Many times people talk about gathering requirements, but it's not just a simple collection process. A better term for this that we think is requirements elicitation. Elicitation involves collection, yes, but it also involves exploration, discovery, and sometimes even invention. I actually have a talk that I give internally called The Art and Science of Making Things Up, and it's very much about requirements elicitation. And then requirements can come from many sources. The BA needs to look for requirements from user representatives, subject matter experts, other stakeholders, documentation about business processes, current systems and competing processes. All of these are great sources of requirements. And of course, you have lots of different techniques for elicitation: interviews, workshops, observing people while they work, doing surveys, prototyping, and document analysis. The book doesn't really go into the elicitation techniques, but talks about 4 core elicitation practices. So the first is to understand what users need to do with the system. These are specifically stakeholders that are going to use the system in some way, and a focus on usage versus a focus on features. The next one is identifying events and responses. So all systems react to various kinds of events that trigger some kind of response. There can be business events that launch a use case, a signal event, like inputs from a switch or a sensor, and temporal or time-triggered events that lead to some system behavior. This is a very good complement to understanding what users need to do with the system. One of my personal favorites, assessing data concepts and relationships. Software systems exist to process data, so you can learn a lot by assessing the data concepts and relationships in your system. Data modeling is a powerful technique for this purpose. And lastly, in elicitation, eliciting and evaluating quality attributes. Besides functionality, for every product, you need to explore the quality attributes or non-functional requirements. There are often trade-offs between these quality characteristics that mean you can't optimize all of them at once. Moving on, I'm doing these very high level. We can dig into any of these you guys find interesting after I cover this. So we got 3 more slides here. Requirements analysis. Well, once you have some requirements, you're going to need to analyze them, right? But what exactly does it mean to analyze requirements? Analysis as a word sounds like something that just kind of happens through staring at requirements long enough. But in reality, you can use several techniques to search for specific problems and produce better requirements, and hence better solutions. Analyzing requirements is where a skilled BA really adds value. It's an incremental and iterative process, interwoven with ongoing requirements elicitation, specification, and validation activities. Requirements analysis involves ensuring that the needs of all stakeholders are understood and documented. The outcome of a successful analysis ensures that a satisfactory solution to meet those needs can be defined, agreed upon, built, and tested. Analysis involves multiple thought processes to confirm completeness, clarity, and correctness. You can ask questions to make sure you understand what each requirement is saying. Analysis also involves decomposing and detailing requirements to an appropriate level and representing them in multiple ways to ensure understanding. You can also compare those multiple representations to fill in any knowledge gaps. And of course, along the way, you confirm, refine, and reassess what you know. Here are the 4 essential requirements analysis practices. First is simply to analyze both individual requirements and sets of requirements. Second is to create requirements models. Drawing visual diagrams or models of requirements is an especially powerful technique. I have been a huge fan of requirements modeling for many years. And in fact, modeling requirements visually is core to our methodology at Argonne Digital. The 12th or third in this area is to create and evaluate prototypes. People often create prototypes, which can be possible or preliminary or partial implementations to better understand the problem and to refine and validate requirements for some part of the solution. And finally, in analysis, you have to prioritize the requirements. Because no team can implement all of its requirements simultaneously, they must prioritize them to make sure that the team delivers the most important capabilities in the right sequence to maximize the delivered customer value. Grab some water real quick. Okay. The term requirement specification, when we talk about requirement specification, refers both to the recording of requirements knowledge and to the deliverables you produce, such as a software requirement specification. So whenever you see the phrase writing requirements, please mentally convert that to representing requirements knowledge. Natural language text likely will always be the most popular way to record software requirements because it's how people normally communicate. However, there are many alternatives, including tables, visual analysis models, tests, screen designs, prototypes, decision tables, and even mathematical equations. Some people don't like to write requirements, but the cost of recording knowledge is small in comparison to the cost of acquiring that knowledge or reacquiring it in the future. Our human memories are imperfect and incomplete. They fade and distort over time, and more importantly, other people can't access them. So documented requirements constitute a persistent group memory. Once you have those requirements, they can be stored in many structures. That includes documents, spreadsheets, databases, requirements management tools, stickies on a wall, whatever works for you. They can vary in how much information they contain, how that information is organized, how much detail is included, and so forth. Think of your requirement spec simply as being a container for that requirements-related knowledge, no matter its form. The most important point to remember is that the goal of writing any kind of requirement is always clear and effective communication, and there are many ways to achieve that. So the core requirement specification practices are to write various requirements in a consistent way and according to recognizable patterns, and to organize that information in a structured fashion with the help of a document template. You also need to identify and document business rules. They're very important requirement-related information. They are not necessarily requirements themselves, but there are many requirements derived to enforce or comply with business rules. And a common vocabulary helps the participants avoid misunderstandings. So every project should have a glossary of significant terms, abbreviations, acronyms, and synonyms to make sure that everyone understands them in the same way. As Carl likes to say, requirements is a communications discussion, not really an engineering issue. By the time you get to validation, oops, I lost my slide. There we go. By the time you get to validation in the requirements development process, you understand the business objectives. Well, we hope. You've elicited some requirements for some portion of the solution from various stakeholders. You've analyzed it. You've recorded that in appropriate forms. Now you're ready to begin development, right? Yeah, well, maybe. Yes, you have some requirements, but how do you know that they're the right requirements? Are you confident that they'll meet the user's goals and address the business situation that led to launching the initiative in the first place? You could have a set of beautifully written and modeled requirements that appear to be crystal clear, complete, and unambiguous, and yet they still could be wrong. So requirements validation activities strive to confirm that some set of requirements accurately describe stakeholder needs and to confirm that a solution based on those requirements would satisfy business needs and achieve the business objectives. Many people use the terms verification and validation interchangeably and or confuse them. Verification is a process of making sure that whatever you built was done correctly and to specification. Validation ensures that you're doing the right thing. So I come from a civil engineering background as a structural engineer. And so when I think about verification and validation, it was, the engineer designed a bridge. Well, did they design it correctly? Did they use the right size plates or the right size dowels? That's validation. Verification is, I've given you the design. Did that builder, that construction worker actually do the design as specified? Did they lay out the rebar at every 8 inches? So that's just my kind of fun personal story in there. So the requirements validation activities, they're interwoven, just like all the other ones. They're interwoven with elicitation, analysis, and specification. You can use prototypes or early releases of your solution, or indeed, you could deliver the whole solution and validate whether you did the right thing. But those can be rather expensive and you don't get much feedback until you've actually built something. So our core practice here involves a combination of reviewing the requirements, both with other BAs and with other stakeholders, and testing them long before you have any code. Okay, this is my last slide. So we've discussed 18 of the practices so far to develop a high quality set of solution requirements. But once you have those fine requirements, what happens to them? Requirements management here is the subdomain of requirements engineering that deals with how requirements are used on the project and how the project responds to evolving needs. Requirements management involves many ongoing activities. You need to track versions of individual requirements as they change over time. Similarly, the status of each individual requirement goes from being proposed to approved to ultimately either being verified as correctly implemented in the product or deferred or deleted. And if you're serious about requirements management, you'll trace each requirement both backward to its origin and forward to design elements, code, tests, and other artifacts that show where it was implemented in the solution. These are all valuable, but the two most important requirements practices that we believe apply to every project are establishing and managing requirements baselines and managing changes to requirements in an effective manner. Every project has to have a mechanism in place to add new requirements that come along, to modify existing ones, and delete planned requirements from your backlog of pending work. Okay, so those are the slides. Those are all 20 of the practices. I'm going to stop sharing, at least for now, if I can figure it out.
You can keep sharing. I just hide them. But I thank you very much for giving you this really fast overlook of the whole book. And it was very useful, very deep. I would say that it's not deep enough that we should not read the book. We still have to read it, but we have a very good overview about how it is, and it was really useful. And I would like to ask our guests here if someone have a question and want to bring it for Candace, or a comment or anything. Dani?
Yeah, for sure. So, Candice, one thing that I like it, mostly it's about the third point, that you have to have those boundaries, yeah, on the requirements. So, do you think it's somehow a way for us to delimit, as some of the agile team says about the MVP, the minimum viable product, or something? Are they correlated somehow?
Oh, absolutely. So that practice, the third practice, is one of my favorites as well. So really setting what that solution scope should be, both in terms of the products that are involved, the features in each product, and which systems own each feature. So in that practice, we even talk a little bit about how you can use that to plan releases. So you can say, yep, our MVP is you have your main product and it's going to talk with one system. And then in release 2, we're going to add another 2 systems. And release 3, we're going to have fully integrated, I think it was order delivery was the example we used in the book. But most definitely that scoping solution both works at a whole project level as well as a release level.
Oh, thank you. And another point that I like it, yeah, it's about these, the differentiation that you do about verification and validation. Because mostly what we have in mind, and that's the point when we are, building I don't want to tell about solutions because the idea is one step behind. Yeah, don't focus too much on solutions, but mostly focus on the problems. But it's kind of tricky part, yeah, because it looks like that we need to do everything like right away in the correct form, so it's kind of tricky, this part, to make these how can I say, this kind of differentiation between verification and validation. So do you have like how can I say, a way, yeah, a tip for us to how we can try to avoid, instead of doing verification, start doing more validations?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It was actually one of the things Carl taught me when we were writing the book. That testing requirements was really interesting to me. So I'm a very visual person. And so Carl had written a little piece of this about how you could, write tests for your solution or your product separately from the requirements. And then you can go through and trigger each test from your requirements or your models. And I was like, well, this is great, but I want a picture. So we actually went back to a process flow that we had created for one of the earlier chapters. And in doing so, I was like, oh, I made a mistake in this process flow. And so we wrote a test. So the example, and actually, I could show it to you real quick. So this is a true story from the trenches. Let me get to the right slide though first. Actually, it's part of our normal deck here. But the interesting part is that it's actually a true story. This was not a fabricated example for the book. So I made this process flow. Oh, there it goes. Mm-hmm. Must have been practice, was that 10 for the requirements models. So I created this one and I was going through it and I was like, well, this is great. But if I go through this process flow logically, if the item I want is not in stock and I don't want any more items, well, this process flow tells me to send an empty quote to the customer, and that doesn't sound right. So of course, then we have the test that given the cart is empty and we don't want any more items, then we should stop. We shouldn't send an empty quote because that's silly. So when we try to trace this is the picture that we ended up making. We go, well, we can't do that. If you follow the model, I get an empty quote and I'm an angry customer because I'm like, well, why did you send me a quote for nothing? That's silly. So we actually then redid the process flow to add a decision that would say, hey, if there's nothing in the cart, well, don't send them a quote in the process. Otherwise, send them the quote. And thus, you can actually test your requirements before you write any code. So in this case, obviously, it was my brain. I was thinking of the tests. But ideally, you actually have testers who can think of tests. And then you can try to say, well, can they trigger it? And this was a very interesting discovery to me because at Argonne Digital, we really do a lot of visual modeling, and you derive your tests from the models. Well, that's great, but if you derive your tests only from the models and don't think backwards, well, then you're going to miss cases like this that we just pointed out in the book. So it's really good to look at it from both directions. So I found, and I'll stop sharing again. But there we go. So Carl likes to call them the victims of our requirements. having testers and engineers and architects review those requirements, because they always find different issues than you would find as a BA.
I wonder, when you started working with Carl to build this book, I think Carl has a very long and extensive career in traditional projects. And I see that you had a very important role in the book, bringing some agile practices, something that have been used in the past few years, where Carl is probably not joining software projects at this time. He's how do we say, aposentado?
Retired.
Yeah, he's been
He's
retired.
retired. Yeah, he's been retired. Not as an author, because he's very productive in our community, but not as a software engineer. And I would like to know from you, what are the things that you brought from this partnership, or to this partnership, that changed some of Carl's ideas, and how did you help to put in this book what is the most new way of doing software requirements? This, what we call, I know Carl don't like this term very much, but agile requirements.
Yep. I mean, Carl and I both agreed. I mean, regardless of what you call them, every project needs requirements, even agile projects. They can call them user stories or features or epics, but you still need the same kinds of information to build software, regardless of how you're building it. So really, a lot of my contributions in that space was kind of about like the terminology that various agile projects use, right? So around acceptance criteria and acceptance tests. Because Carl and I actually talked a lot about that, because he was like, oh, you just write acceptance tests. And it's like, well, no, it's acceptance criteria. And a lot of times they are written as tests, right? Because they're Gherkin, but not always. So things like that. And then one of my favorites was in the defining requirements baselines, because when you talk about a baseline, like that's a committed set of scope, and agile projects will be like, well, no, we don't do that, right? We welcome change, we're flexible. And that's true to a point, because agile projects have baselines too. They call them sprints. And so when you get to sprint planning, you're committing to a set of scope for that sprint. And then that scope is locked. If you want to change scope within a sprint, yeah, the developers get rather touchy.
They are going to kill you for sure.
And so, yeah, it's really fun to kind of bring that balanced view of, like, we call it a baseline and you call it something different, but it's kind of the same thing. It's just at different levels. So you can have time-bound baselines, which could be a sprint or a release or a group of iterations, which are more common, of course, in agile projects. Or you could have a scope-bound baseline, which is more common in traditional projects, which says, I have my BRD or SRS and I want everything in here built, and you tell me when you're going to deliver it. And so kind of getting to show those two juxtaposing sides, as well as managing changes to requirements. Because, when you're agile, you say, yep, we embrace change, but there's still a process to manage it. It's not uninhibited, unbridled change. It's change, yes, but you have a discussion with your developer, your scrum master, or your product owner to make sure it gets slotted into the backlog appropriately and doesn't, unjustly impede the work that's going on in the current sprint. And so that's probably just bringing those kind of agile terms, how we work. And some of my favorites, like I've been very much into the data in my last few projects. And so bringing into some of those data concepts and kind of my lessons learned into that practice.
Thank you for that. Nuno Peters, do you want to bring something? Nuno.
I hope my connection is better now. Let's see if it sticks. Still on that part of verification and validation, for example, I have seen on a team that I work with is that sometimes if we are missing like a scenario or something before the sprint starts, and sometimes I am discussing it with the development team, etc., and we see that there's a missing loophole or something like that on the process. I mean, and we add that detail and that requirement during the sprint. And I mean, usually it's okay. It's not like it has to be once we add our refinements or something, once it passes our definition of ready. So that requirement is static. I mean, at least I think not at all, right? So I mean, at least that's how I do it. I just talking about the book again. So I think it's I'm still going through it, you know. Okay, this side. But I believe that, and for some of us,
Uh-oh.
We lost your sound, Nuno.
I think it's the red light. You can see it.
Yes, we
Yes,
lost your
exactly.
sound. No, we lost your sound.
I'm back.
Yes, you're
Yes.
back.
Okay. I was just saying that for us, that for example, we have read the BA book and other books. I think we can easily relate to the areas that you have in our book. Also, I have some preferred ones already on each of the on each area. I've particularly like, for example, starting on the problem and not the solution, and also focusing on user needs. So definitely, when I started an interview with a customer, it's not like, what do you want now? And first, it was also my first question: what do you want? And it's still like a challenge, you know. It's because they always say, I need this field and I need this info here. I need to be in this color, and the button has to be right here. And you know, it's challenging for to tell us that, to tell them that, okay, let's step a little back. What is your pains? What almost for sure you also deal with those challenges as well. And they want to get
about
directly
this specific point. When I was looking for memes, I found this one, and this is very good. And I didn't show during the meme session, but I think we can use it right now, and probably Candace can help me doing the business analyst in this story. Here it is. So this discovers why it's not always easy being a business analyst. Candace, can you please be the business analyst? He's in the right part. So you start.
Okay. So I understand that you need a horse.
That's right. A horse right away.
But you don't need to ride it.
Of course not. I said I need a horse.
And it should have horns, and you're going to milk it, or need to milk it.
What are you? A Halfit? What else would I do with a horse?
We'll see what we can do. You're going to get a unicorn, horse, cow hybrid.
Right. Talking about problems and solutions and putting solutions ahead of it and trying to understand what your customer really needs and your user needs, right? So.
Well, and especially when they come and say, I just needed to do everything the old system did. It's like, okay, well, great, but I don't know what the old system did, so help me out. But yeah, for sure, starting like users have an idea, either they've interacted with it or they have their own processes. And so getting them to think back, like, well, why are you doing this? What is it helping you do, so that we can maybe find even a better way to do it? I was on a project one time where I was given a spreadsheet and I was like, okay, well, how do we get to this field? And they're like, we click a button in Excel. And I'm like, okay, what does the button do? We don't know. But we need you to replicate that button. I was like, that's gonna be a little bit difficult, but okay. So yeah, but especially like I love, especially if they're in a system already, getting to observe people, because then you can see like where they're getting hung up today. How are they using the system or not using the system sometimes is more important. Like, what are the things that they're doing shadow IT in their spreadsheets that you don't know about?
Perfect. Ricardo, do you want to join the group?
Oh, for sure. First, I would like to say that Nuno has the book, but I'm the only one who has the background.
Yeah.
Did look familiar.
Candace, thank you so much for your presentation. You know, I'm about to start a project, and I'll definitely watch this again and get the 20 core practices and buy the book, because that first slide about the questions, the first one that you showed, that there are many questions there. And that relates to my question, and I can trace it back to Fabricius meme with the character from, what is the name of the movie? The one that is the rage, I
Austin
think.
Powers.
Oh,
No,
Inside
the
Out.
other one. Inside
Oh.
Out. Yeah.
Inside Out.
We have to know the name of the movie in English as well, right? So
This is the one, right?
Yes.
So,
that-
and I think it adds to the question that Nuno asked, and Fabrizio bring out again. So when I was watching your slides, I noticed that the first things that we need to do, and it makes total sense, is figure out what is the problem, what is the business problem that we're trying to solve, what is the solution look like. I really like the phrase that you used, define the solution boundaries as well, and objectives that we need to achieve. So I think it's only in Brazil. I think it doesn't happen in other parts of the world, but I have lost track of the times that I enter into a meeting to start a project and we do not have answers to those questions. It's like the meme, just let's start building it. And especially in the agile world, which I'm most happy to participate and belong to, we often hear, let's just create prototypes and moving on, right? So I understand that you cannot spend a lot of time figuring out requirements before start building something, but there's some groundwork that you need to do before even start committing resources from the company. And I don't see this here, at least in my experience in Brazil, like maybe a solid business case, even if it's a flip chart that has a clear vision and what we need to do. So I was wondering, how do you cope with that? Because there is the requirements that we're going to figure out during the project. And you also brought a brilliant point, in my point of view, is that how are we going to manage those requirements later? Because the people who are doing the project, they go away, and normally a product owner or product manager has to receive the new team and start figuring out the rest of the solution or the updates. So there's a lot of things on those things. But my question is related to that first part. Do you think we are, as business analysts, working well on helping directors or businessmen understand that there's something that needs to be understood before we start doing anything? How is that in your experience?
It's definitely still hit or miss, even here in the States. So it's because much like engineers and our developers, like business analysts want to go solve problems. We want to go fix things. So you tell us, go climb that hill. We're like, great, okay, we're going to go build the thing. It'll be fine. We'll be back in a couple weeks. But we really have to slow down and be like, well, wait, why that hill? And what I've found to be interesting is that many times that rationale exists somewhere. We just don't have access to it, right? Somebody had to make a business case to get funding for that project. We just don't have it. And so it's kind of reverse engineering. Well, why did we want to do this in the first place so that we solve the right problem? And one of the things I found interesting is a lot of times there are multiple interrelated problems. So there's like the core problem that they say, yep, this is the main reason. But if you don't understand all the kind of contributing problems, you may not, there may be a better solution. So yep, you can solve the core problem, but if you knew about those contributing ones, you could have come up with a better solution that would solve, say, 5 problems instead of just one. One of my key tricks here, and this goes back to my art and science of making things up, is I'll just take a guess. I will guess what your problem is, and I will usually put some sort of very outrageous number with it. we're going to save $11 billion or something. And turns out people don't like that on paper. And so they'll usually give you at least a better answer than whatever one you started with.
In other words, I think you need a unicorn, not a horse. But let's see what it can do, right? That's great. Thank you.
Or a horse and a cow and, a lot of animals in that way.
A horse who brings milk from the market.
Yeah.
I want to explore a little bit more this question from Ricardo about the beginning or the pre-project phase and the business needs before the solution needs. So when you explain requirements, you said about the levels of requirements. You have Daniela spoke at the beginning from the BA guide, the business requirements, stakeholder requirements, and solution requirements as a way of understanding from the problem to define the solution. I understand it that way. I have been heard from some people in our community, something that I don't agree very much, but I would like to hear your opinion on that, is that when we changed the name from requirements engineering to business analysts, we made a very important change in the role of someone doing that. That's not focusing on software, but focusing on business. And so this change was an important change in our careers, and I think it brought very good results for organizations, because we have people not just looking for developing software, but looking for solving business problems. And the BA guide brings requirements analysis and design definition as a knowledge area, but it also brings not enterprise analysis in version 3 is strategy analysis. So we have to look for the business. And I have been heard from some business analysts or business analyst teachers or coaches that they feel like requirements is restricting some of our members in our community to go forward, because they're very focused in specifying requirements and trying to understand the requirements. And when they're very focused on defining scope for a solution, so they're very focused on the solution requirements. And they're not looking very well for the other work that a business analyst should do that will be more strategic, more trying to understand what are the mission of this organization, what are the vision, what are our competitors, how should be our strategy for our organization. And they don't see requirements in that level. I would like to hear from you. What's your perspective on these diverse areas where business analysts are working on?
That's a big question. There's lots of different facets to it. So, I mean, what I found is a lot of business analysts kind of end up focusing in one portion of business analysis. Oh, I'll get the right word there. And I speak English as my first language. So like some tend to focus more on the technical side. I love the technical side. Like I've been knee deep in APIs and JSON schemas for the last couple of weeks. And some people very much prefer that strategic enterprise or even marketing side of business analysis. And so I think a good business analyst needs to know, I guess, enough to be dangerous of all the levels, right? Like, even though I focus on the technical, I have to know enough to be dangerous at that enterprise level. I have to know at least what those big picture views are, even if I'm not the one driving it. And then the people who are focused on that enterprise level, that strategy level, well, they're not going to be very useful at their jobs if they don't know at least a little bit of that solution side and technical side that says what things are even feasible. Because otherwise they're going to come up with these big grand ideas that we can't even do. So I do think there's kind of a bit of a balance there. And so finding that balance, I think, is going to be, each person will have a different balance of what that means. But I agree, like the term, like the role business analyst tends to get more pigeonholed into the solution side. And so some of it's more almost branding and marketing, right? Do we call ourselves enterprise analysts or strategic analysts or something else when we want that different level of role? It's a similar thing with like product owner versus product manager versus product marketer. Just kind of different flavors for a lot of the same skill set, but just focused on different things. don't know if I quite answered your question, but those are my thoughts on the matter as of today.
I guess you did. It's a good question, a good answer. I would like to bring some questions and comments from the audience. So Dennis said that I like to use the question, what is our plan of attack? Which problem frustrates you? And he mentioned that when we are trying to understand what are the needs of our users, right? And what's the problem before defining the solution. Lina told, it's nice when it's reminded that artifacts are a result of analysis. Have already heard comment like, we will take so long just to write one document. And Dennis also said, only a Sith deals with absolutes. Someone having to explain the balance in the Agile Manifesto. I think Peters can help us to understand what's in the mind of a Sith. He's our expert in those subjects.
Well, it's understanding we value the things. Was it the value the things on the left more? But it doesn't mean we don't value the things on the right at all.
Perfect.
Yeah, mostly when I see like Agile Manifesto, yeah, and we always heard like people over process, yeah, or those kind of things, yeah. But we have to remember that it's not because we are building process. It's not that we are not hearing people, yeah. It's not something that will, impact the way that we are still listening to the people and their pain points and understand as much as we can. But it's kind of interesting, this agile perspective, because in the way that I see the idea of agile, most of the times is try to do the mistakes early. Yeah. So if we can try at least to do the requirements, yeah, and we do the mistakes early, and then okay, I understood, let's do the requirements. It will be like less pain, yeah, because it's much more, you will have more cost if you don't understand your requirements, and then you develop, and then to show to your stakeholders, and then they say, well, it's not what we want.
It's cheaper to validate requirements than to validate a solution in production, right?
Exactly. So that's the way that I like to see Agile. And this kind of balance, sometimes it's kind of tricky, yeah? Because most of the times when I see Agile Manifesto, I just remember, yeah, what's the historical way when they created the Agile Manifesto? We have to remember it was like men's, and most were developers, yeah? They have this mindset of develop right away, yeah? So we didn't have in that time, like an Agile Manifesto with business analysts. So what I think we can try to do like a business analyst, Agile Manifesto point, yeah, to see our way as well in our Agile mindset as well. So that will be interesting.
Yeah, Agile is all about failing fast.
Exactly.
Or at least learning fast. Well. Candace, it was very good to have you here. Before ending this session, I would like Daniela to help me to present the next events that we are going to have in our community here. I guess we can even tell the name of our events in Portuguese, Daniela, because this is just for the for the Brazilian community. Brazilian and Portugal, right, Nuna? For the Portuguese community. So next week, what are we going to have, Daniela?
Well, next week, what do you want me to do, in Portuguese or in English?
Let's do in Portuguese. That's for the Portuguese. Okay. Excuse us, Candice, for a little.
Sorry about that. Então, próxima semana a gente vai ter uma live sobre experiência de confiança nas organizações. Então, vamos falar com o Sérgio Luiz Haas. Eu acho que vai ser bem interessante, principalmente falar sobre Trust Experience. Eu acho que esse é é um bom ponto sobre o quanto a gente confia, né? Eu acho que é bem interessante.
Legal. O Sérgio
Essa
já esteve com a
perspectiva.
gente aqui falando de processos de negócios, vai estar de novo com a gente aqui agora falando dessa experiência de confiança. Isso na semana que vem, tá? Mas não se esqueçam que de 13 a 15 de setembro nós vamos ter aqui em São Paulo o BA Brasil, a Conferência Internacional de Análise de Negócio, a maior conferência da América Latina para falar de análise de negócio. E o tema desse ano é torne-se nimble, ou seja, compreenda e responda a mudanças com precisão e velocidade usando análise de negócio. Vai ter um grupo grande de palestrantes aqui, nós vamos ter dinâmicas, são 3 trilhas simultâneas com dinâmicas, palestras, a gente tem um dia só dedicado a mini cursos, vai ser muito legal e é um momento onde a comunidade se reúne ao vivo, a cores em 3 dimensões. Se você ainda não comprou, entra lá no nosso site BA Brasil, aliás, é iba.org.br/BA Brasil, com o seu convite lá. E quem quiser participar do papo aqui com a gente, trazer uma ideia, Call for Papos, tá? Entre em contato com o Thiago, que é membro aqui do nosso grupo, e passa a sua ideia para ele. Fala, pô, eu tenho um tema aqui, gostaria de apresentar e gostaria de participar do Papo de Negócio. Será um prazer ter vocês com a gente. O Laerte está fazendo uma pergunta em português, mas essa pergunta deve ser traduzida por inglês. Candace, this question is in Portuguese, but it is for you. Laerte is asking, when will we have the book Essential Requirements Practice translated to Portuguese?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know that we've heard from the publisher on that, on any translations. I know they're shipping in Europe, but I haven't at least heard anything. So we'll probably have to ask Carl.
But if you want, we are here to help you on those translations. So
I have a very nice group of volunteers here, including Nuno, who is one member of our group that worked on the translation of the BA standard from IIBA, also in the certification of business analysis that is now available also in English. Let me show you this one.
In Portuguese.
in Portuguese.
In Portuguese, sorry.
Yeah.
In Portuguese. So the ECBA certification is now available in Portuguese for our community, and anyone who wants to be a business certified analyst, or at least using the ECBA, the Entrance Certificate of Business Analysis for IIBA, can do the test in Portuguese now. So
That's really cool.
that's really cool, isn't it? We waited so long for that. Candace, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Peters. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Nuno. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Next week, we are going to be here again. Candace, if you want to join us, it will always be a pleasure. You just have to learn Portuguese a little bit, but if you want to practice.
No worries. Thanks for having me. This has been great.
All right. So we are going to end this session right now, and usually stay 5 minutes after the end of the transmission. If you can stay with us, it will be a pleasure to have you here. Bye-bye, folks. Thank you very much.
Fabricio, just before we go, just to say that our magazine, so it's almost done, almost coming out. And I just ask if you can share our link for, because anyone can submit papers for that.
Oh, that's good. The link's here.
If you could also share it. This one is almost out, but we need to be preparing for the next ones.
All right, the link's here on the chat if people want to click, or here on the video as well. So if anyone wants to share and participate on the magazine, please join us for the business analysis Brazilian magazine, or Portuguese magazine. Sorry, Bruno, we're born in Brazil. Thank you very much, folks. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.